Good day. My name is Dr. Kabir Adamu. I'm the Managing Director of Beacon Consulting Limited. We are an enterprise security risk management and intelligence firm operating in Nigeria and the Sahel countries. So it started on the 26th of July when information started filtering from the Nigerian government house, suggesting that there was perhaps an attempt at change of government, a military intervention, as it were, or adventurism in the country. Now, throughout that day, there was lots of chatter, lots of speculation. But by the evening of that day, it had been confirmed that the presidential guards within the Nigerian armed forces, who were responsible for protecting the presidential villa, had staged a coup d'etat, and that they had kept in detention the constitutionally elected president. By virtue of that, they were poised to take over the government. Now that continued into the night when they released a statement and of course towards the next day, suggesting that they had suspended the country's constitution and have, as it were, put on hold everything about governance, including the country's parliament. Of course, once the constitution is suspended, it affects virtually everything in government. And so that's how they went about arresting members of the government that was led by Mohamed Bazoum, the detained president. There was also a protest almost immediately by supporters of the president to show their rejection of this unconstitutional change in government. That protest was suppressed, and then almost immediately another protest followed through by so-called supporters of the coupist, and that protest was showing their resentment for the French, while at the same time showing their love, as it were, for the Russians, who they felt would probably give them a better deal than the French had given them. And that's how it all continued all through that day into the next day. And then by the second day, ECOWAS met, condemned, and several other multilateral platforms, AU, UN, name them, condemned the coup, called for a return to constitutional order. ECOWAS met thereafter and decided to impose a set of sanctions on the country, economic sanctions mainly, and then also indicated that they were ready for a military intervention if the junta does not return power to the constitutionally elected president. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened at the early stages. There is a long-running historical relationship between Niger and Nigeria. This relationship is strategic in many fronts. If we look at the power component, or even the natural requirements of Nigeria as a country, we have a river Niger. The source of River Niger is somewhere, I think, in the Guinea. It passes through about 9 countries before it gets to Nigeria. One of the last countries it passes through is Niger. And part of the traditional agreements, treaties that we entered into with Niger is that they should not construct dams on the River Niger, just to make sure that we have adequate water in the River Niger, which would help support communities. If you look at the flow of River Niger, it goes through several states in Nigeria. And then, of course, the main point is around Niger State, where we have the Kainji Dam, which is almost largely dependent on the flow of water from the River Niger. So that's one strategic importance of that relationship. If they decide to construct a dam on that river, it would definitely impact our ability To produce food, our food security requirement will be threatened, because remember, most of the communities along the River Niger depend on that river for both irrigation, farming, and then sometimes for their livelihoods. So that's one likely outcome. Of course, we depend on that river too for, I think, about 30% of our energy requirement. Even though this is, I'm not sure of the percentage, it needs to be confirmed. But I know that our dependence on hydroelectricity is quite high in Nigeria. We've been discussing the need to change our energy mix, but I know we're still highly dependent on hydro power generation. And so imagine a situation where they construct dams along the River Niger. It reduces the flow of water into the River Niger, what impact it will have on us as a country, and of course on the economy of Nigeria, including our food security. So that's one. The second one is our security, national security, as it were. The landmass in Niger is bigger than the landmass in Nigeria. And it also shares borders with some of the most turbulent parts of Africa, including desert locations in Libya, where at the moment you have several terrorist organizations that are operational. Most of them are affiliated with either IS, Islamic State, or affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Now, Nigeria, as the biggest country within the sub-region, most of them have interest in Nigeria. Niger has been providing like a buffer to prevent them from accessing Nigeria from places like Libya, places like Mali and Mauritania, and several other parts of the sub-region, as well as the Sahel region. Now, if Niger becomes a vulnerable point through which these non-state armed groups, especially the terrorist ones, are able to access Nigeria, then frankly, our national security will be impacted. Just to give you a sense, Niger has membership of two regional bodies that are currently the world's focus on countering terrorism within the sub-region, and that is the G5, as well as the Multinational Joint Task Force. The G5 used to have its headquarters in Mali, but after the coup in Mali, there was a discussion to move that headquarters to Niger. That hasn't happened yet. And then, of course, for the Multinational Joint Task Force, its headquarters is in Chad. Now, Niger is a participatory country in these two task forces. If Niger withdraws its participation, or for some reasons its capacity as a state to protect its border is decreased, then it means the avenue, almost the landmass of Niger, like I mentioned, is bigger than Nigeria. It shares borders with 7 states. So the security of those 7 states will be hugely threatened. And once the security of those 7 states are hugely threatened, in Nigeria's national security is also threatened. Apart from that, there are age-old gun-running channels that exist in the Sahel region. Some of these gun-running channels pass through Niger into Nigeria. Now, again, if Niger's capacity as a state to man its borders and reduce the use of those gun-running channels is threatened or is made weakened as a result of several things, including the coup, then Nigeria will be hugely impacted. So this and several other factors makes Nigeria's relationship with Niger a very strategic one. Now, we saw this play out during the Civil War. Most of our enemies saw Niger as a vulnerable point, and they did everything within their powers to get Niger to allow them to use either its territorial borders or its air space to support the Biafrans at that time. But Niger stood its ground and supported Nigeria. And so that relationship, I think, has subsisted up until this period. So let's call a spade a spade. In the space where I operate, prevention is the best bet. You take measures, especially when issues affect your national security. You take measures to prevent occurrences. You don't wait until occurrences happen, and then you play catch up. And by this statement, I'm not in any way suggesting that this particular administration, has failed in that regard. It's new. It's just, I think, about 2 months old. And to be fair to it, these are issues that could have been better handled by the previous administration. Here specifically, I'm talking about intelligence. The central focus of Nigeria's foreign policy is Africa. And if you do a concentric cycle of that central focus, our neighboring countries will come first before countries further than us. So in other words, we should have the intelligence capability of knowing when the president of Niger has a running stomach. We should have the intelligence capability of knowing whatever it is that is happening and is about to happen in Niger. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in the situation that we're in at the moment. Intelligence is foreknowledge. Niger is just about 25 million persons. There were instances in the past where we're paying the civil servants of Niger their salaries. In other words, we had enormous influence. If we had capitalized on that influence, we could have been in possession of intelligence that would have indicated that that coup was about to happen. Now, because I'm in a public space, I'm very careful what I would say. There are certain instances where the coup would be to our advantage. There are certain instances where the coup would not be to our advantage. But suffice to say, we should be in a position to influence the outcome of political developments, economic developments, strategic developments in Niger to support our actions so that we reach a stage where the outcomes are favorable to us. Now, that is when in international politics and foreign policy, you would have achieved your objectives. Now, with direct response to your answer, whether the issue of military intervention, in this regard, we're playing catch-up. The coup has already happened. And because it has already happened, we are now trying to fix what we should have prevented in the first place. It is a bad situation. Yes, in the context of where we found ourselves, using ECOWAS as a platform to do that is our best means. And in that regard, we are not adopting strategic communication. The Nigerian junta is ahead of us. They are able to dictate the narrative. They've been able to mobilize support, internal support for their actions, when clearly their actions is in violation of the Nigerian constitution, is in violation of ECOWAS protocols on good governance and democracy, is in violation of AU protocols and rules and instruments on democracy and good governance. It's in violation of norms of the AU, the UN, and several other multilateral platforms that Niger is a member of. But because they've been able to control the narrative, they are being seen now as the victim, when in reality they are the oppressors. So we need, Nigeria and ECOWAS need to embrace strategic communication in such a manner that the narrative is one where the Nigerian junta is seen as a group that has violated Nigeria's constitution. It has violated everything that is a norm in international politics. And the best way to do that is combining both conventional media as well as cyberspace, where, for instance, some of the narratives right now, Nigeria is seen as the enemy. Of course, like you rightly said, Nigeria is the chair of the ECOWAS, but the decision by Nigeria is just one out of a decision taken by the 15 countries that are members of AU. So that's the kind of strategic messaging that we need to churn out so that the world, the Nigerians and every other person sees the action as an ECOWAS action and not necessarily a Nigerian action. And of course, also sees the fact that the perpetrator here, the cause of all of this is the junta that violated the country's constitution. So, like you rightly indicated, the Sahel region is a potpourri of different security challenges. It can be argued that at the moment, the Sahel region is the hotspot for terrorism globally. It is also the hotspot for the age-old conflict between communities, what I will call inter-community conflict between the Fulanis, the Tuaregs, and several other ethnic groups that exist within the region. You find that in Mali, you find it in Nigeria, you find it in several other parts of the Sahel. Then you also have the kind of conflict that we're discussing, military incursion into governance, as it were, in the same region. So clearly, the Sahel region is probably the most troubled region in the world at the moment. Now, there is a history to that. It started well before the change of government in Libya, the forceful overthrow of Gaddafi, which was a Western conspiracy. It started before that. Part of the most recent indicators of the development in the Sahel can be traced to a group in Algeria called the GSPC or something like that. That group is the group that has created almost all the terrorist groups that are in existence at the moment. Al-Qaeda was bettered from that group, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Then, of course, when IS came into the picture, several groups in the region found themselves affiliated with that group. Now, does Russia have a hand in the proliferation of these groups? As an empirical researcher, there is no evidence to suggest that. But there are a lot of conspiracy theories suggesting, for instance, that there may be external influence in the proliferation of these groups, some of them suggesting Western countries, others suggesting Russia. We've even had countries like Turkey, countries like Egypt. There are suggestions saying that they perhaps have a hand in the proliferation of all of this group. But irrespective of what it is, suffice to say that at the moment, the Sahel region is one of the most troubled regions in the world, with the proliferation of these several terror-affiliated groups. Some of them are affiliated to Islamic State, others are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Now, having said that, what has been the role of Wagner? In reality, Wagner, as at today, is an instrument of Russia's foreign policy. In other words, the geopolitics that we're seeing in today's world, where the competition for influence between the West, represented by NATO, and the US, EU, and other countries, and then the Eastern Bloc, represented by Russia and its supporters, is playing out in Africa. So another scramble for Africa is actually playing out at the moment under these two groups. How are we seeing this scramble playing out? They are using energy diplomacy. They are using aid diplomacy. They are using even military influence in terms of the kind of relationship. You want to, a country in Africa wants to purchase a weapon, like it happened to us in Nigeria. They will put stumbling blocks on the purchase of those weapons. Russia would offer to us to come and get those weapons from it. So that kind of scramble is currently going on. Wagner, like I mentioned, it's an instrument of foreign policy by Russia, where gaps are created through occurrences, including military adventurism that may be supported or incentivized by Russia. The next thing is Wagner will go in and then start supporting that country. We saw it in Mali, we saw it in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, in Central African Republic, and several other parts of the continent. We are likely to see it in Niger. After the July 26th coup, the Nigerian junta sent a delegation to Mali, where they specifically requested Wagner to come in. And like I mentioned earlier on, Russian flags are being displayed by Nigerians in their numbers, asking for Russia's intervention. So sadly, we're seeing another scramble for Africa. And for me, the greatest pain is the fact that we've not learned any lessons. In the case of Niger, they want to leave the difficulties, the post-colonial policy of France, and then go into another relationship with another country that would probably exploit them in the same manner that France may have exploited them. At what point are we going to realize that investing in our human capital, developing our humans to a point where we're able to exploit our own resources, both in terms of our capabilities and then the technology that we have access to, is the way to go, and not necessarily dependent on another country, which would probably repeat the same cycle that they are trying to escape from? Like I started mentioning earlier on, the way out of this is investing in human capital. We're not doing enough of that in Africa. We need to make sure our youth who are coming up right now have the capabilities. We have to be very strategic about this. What do we need as a continent? What do we need as a country in Africa to equip our people to be able to take control of our resources, both in terms of harnessing them, mining them, processing them, and not just exporting raw materials to other countries. I mean, you refer to Nigeria. It's ridiculous and embarrassing that today Nigeria is not able to process petroleum. Almost 60-something years after petroleum was discovered in Nigeria, we have to export the crude petroleum and then buy refined petroleum and bring back to Nigeria. That's the reality of Africa. The uranium that Niger has, it cannot process it. It has to rely on external countries to mine and process that uranium. We can't continue like that as a continent. So our leaders have to wake up. Whatever political statement they go to make at the UN or in Russia, those are political statements. The reality is they need to invest in human capital. Invest in human capital, invest in Africans, make sure we have the capability, the knowledge, and scientific, any relationship we enter into should have technology transfer, knowledge transfer as part of that relationship. Any relationship that we enter that does not allow that is an exploitative relationship. Agreements that exist in countries like Niger, where they exploit their resources and give them only about 5.5% of the revenue from that resources, it's just unbelievable. In fact, it should be taken to the International Criminal, the ICC for prosecution. Whoever allowed that contract to take place should be prosecuted. Whoever allowed that contract to run should be prosecuted. That is how Africa, I think we need to wake up, take charge of our future. But we cannot take charge of our future if we cannot control our resources, if we do not have good governance in place, if we do not have the capability to punish those who exploit or abuse this type of relationship. So the onus is on us. We can continue to pay lip service to these developments, or we can continue to do the right thing. The beginning of doing the right thing rests in embracing democratic governance, allowing elections to be free and fair, so that leaders who emerge are leaders who reflect our aspirations. Sadly, it cannot happen in one day. I mean, everyone who is listening to me and hear all of these things I'm reading out knows that it cannot happen in one day, but we have to start somewhere. And starting somewhere, we've been taking charge of our future, looking at ourselves in the mirror, telling ourselves the truth. The types of governance and leadership we have at the moment do not represent our aspirations, and that needs to be corrected through credible elections. And of course, that would allow it. Second thing is to perhaps dig up all the treaties and agreements that we have with some of these allies, foreign countries that we relate with. As an example, in Nigeria, we have agreements within foreign companies for exploration and exploitation of our petroleum. At what point did we review those contracts to see the contents and whether they are amenable to our democratic aspirations or not? So I think the parliament in most African countries have that responsibility, since they have the mandate for legislation. They need to review existing treaties and contracts with foreign partners, see what the content of those contracts are. If they are reflective of the kind of exploitative relationships between Niger and France, then we need to call a spade a spade, bring them to an end. If they don't, we take it to higher bodies like the UN and the ICC and ask for prosecution, because frankly, this is exploitative. So again, the onus is on us. Invest in human capital, good governance, have credible elections, and maybe we'll come out of this. No, just to emphasize the need for strategic communication. In today's world, you can have the right ideas, you can do the right thing, but if you do not communicate that right thing in the right manner, you will end up being looked at like the enemy. So we need to galvanize ourselves and embrace strategic communication, both Nigeria and ECOWAS, and start winning this war in both the communication space, the cyberspace, as well as the physical space. Wars are not just won on ground, they are won in communication, and how we communicate our narratives, our ideals, so better. And I think in the case of Nigeria, the earlier the president appoints his cabinet, who hopefully would help him harness our national powers towards achieving our national interest, I think the better for everybody. Right now, that cabinet is not in place, and some of the errors or mistakes that are happening as a result of the absence of the cabinet, we are hoping that the cabinet will also be competent. Some of us are a little bit uncomfortable with the candidates that have already been screened, but it is what it is, and hopefully they will have a team. Sometimes individuals are just individuals. What matters is the team they're able to work together with, and they're able to also use pragmatic measures for governance. In other words, what mechanisms they are going to embrace and deploy in terms of supporting the aspirations of the government. The earlier we do this, the better.